Hello, this is Music Tech Help Guy. Welcome to episode 16 of my Logic Pro 10 video tutorial series. In this episode, we'll take a look at the file editor in Logic and some of the unique editing functions that we can do down there. By the way, the file editor in Logic 10 is the same thing as the sample editor in Logic 9. They just gave it a different name. So the way you open up the file editor is you double click on a region, and typically actually what it'll do by default is open the track editor here, and then you just click on file to get to the file editor. Now, one thing to keep in mind, I think I mentioned this in one of the previous editing videos, but when you edit in the arrange area up here, editing is non-destructive there, which means that when you edit a region, you're just editing its in and out points. You're not actually changing the files in your audio files folder on your hard drive. When you edit in the file editor, it is destructive, which means that when you edit here, you're actually changing the source file. So you have to be careful. You can still undo your edits if you just press Command Z, but if you get too many edits ahead, or if you maybe open up this file 3 weeks from now and try to work on it, you eventually will not be able to undo them anymore. So one thing you can do to kind of safeguard against this is if you click on the region you're working with, press Control B, you can actually do a bounce in place, which I think I showed in a previous video. But you just type in the new name up there, press OK, and it'll actually re-render a copy of that file for you. So you've got one working copy and then one as a backup. I'm not going to do that because I don't need to. Now, a quicker way to open up the file editor is to click on the region and press Command 6. And if you don't remember the Command 6 key command, you can always go to Window, Open Audio File Editor. Now, when you do it through the window menu, or you press Command 6, it actually opens up a separate window for the sample or for the file editor. I actually like this better because it's bigger, it's easier to see. All right, so after you open the file editor, you'll notice that it has its own set of 6 different tools, and it also has its own zoom controls. You can zoom horizontally, you can zoom vertically as well. And this is a trend that will continue on in other editors that we start working with, like the piano roll editor or the step editor. Each editor in Logic has its own unique set of tools and also zoom controls. So let's go over the basic way to get playback going down here. In Logic 9, you could simply click somewhere with the pointer tool and create this little line for you. And all you do is you press spacebar and it start playback. What's different in Logic 10 is that when you press spacebar to start playback, it's actually starting playback from where the playhead is here in the arrange window, not necessarily where we selected here. So when I press spacebar, it's actually going to start from the very beginning, even though I've put my selection here. So it actually started at the beginning of the file rather than where I had selected. The way to get around that is you click where you want to start playback, and you can click on this icon right up here. This is pre-listen. And essentially, pre-listen is essentially playback without any of the effects on the track. So if I click on that, it'll start right where I selected, minus any effects that were on the track. And I don't have any effects on the track, so it's not going to matter. And then you just click on the icon again to stop it. Another thing you can do, this is a little faster, is you click where you want to start and then press Control spacebar instead of spacebar. So if I want to start like right here, I just hit Control spacebar and then hit Control spacebar again to stop it. So now we've got the playback controls out of the way. Let's go over the edit tools. There's 6 edit tools. You have the pointer tool, eraser tool, hand tool, zoom tool, solo tool, and pencil tool. The pointer tool, which we've been using a little bit just now, allows you to drag over an area. You can make a selection. And by the way, when you make a selection like this, you can actually press Control spacebar It'll just play that selection for you. You can also drag over an area and you can hit delete on your keyboard. And it'll warn us, hey, this is a destructive operation. The selected portion will be permanently deleted. The audio files stored in your hard drive will be overwritten. So this is just warning us, hey, this is a destructive edit that you're doing here. And when you delete it, you're actually changing the file on the hard drive. And you'll see it actually got rid of the waveform there and then shuffled the two halves together. Now, again, if you hit Command-Z, you can always get it back, but you can only do that so many times. Another thing that changes when you change the waveform up here is this little region boundary here. Basically, the region boundary, this green bar, and it'll be different colors based on what the color of your region is. That determines how much of the waveform in the sample editor is being shown in the arrange window. So what happened there is we lost a little bit of it. So if we pull this out all the way, you'll see that up here now the region is back to where it was before. Okay, so that's the pointer tool in a nutshell. The next tool is the, let's actually go to the hand tool first. The hand tool is, I hate to say it, but basically a useless tool, and here's why. The only thing that the hand tool does is when you are in transients mode over here, transient editing mode, what you can do is you can double click between two transients with your hand tool, and it will select that little slice. So if that little slice of a snare drum or kick drum or whatever it may be here, this is just a little piece of a snare drum. If you use the pointer tool for this, you can actually do the exact same thing, and you can make selections. So the hand tool basically is just used for selecting something in between two transients, but you cannot make a selection with it. Now, the cool thing about using this transient editing mode or transient edit mode is you can find like maybe one little sample of a drum loop or one little note or a chord or something from a song, and then you can drop it into a sampler or maybe reuse it as part of your song. And the way you do that is you double click on it in between the two transients there. You go to Functions, Trim, and what this is going to do is it's going to trim everything around that little selection that we made there. And so now we've got just this little slice of the original recording, and it's just a snare drum. And now I could maybe use this snare drum in a sampler, or maybe use it and copy and paste it to use it musically in my own song. I'm not going to do that for now, though. So I'm just going to hit undo there. And again, I have to go back and set my region boundaries to show the entire waveform here. Okay. So that's the hand tool and the pointer tool. Next tool is the eraser tool. The eraser tool is really only useful when you're editing in transient mode here. What the eraser tool does is it lets you delete those transient markers. We'll come back to how this is useful very soon and within a couple episodes here when we start working with flex time and flex pitch. Because sometimes you may want to ignore a transient, and sometimes you may want Logic to recognize that transient. And so that's what the eraser tool does. It allows you to delete transient markers. So I'm going to get out of transient editing mode here, and we're going to go to the next tool, which is the zoom tool. And the zoom tool works just like the zoom tool worked back in the arrange window. If you drag over an area, it zooms in, and if you click again with it, it zooms back out. Simple enough. Next tool is the solo tool. Essentially, the solo tool is a scrub tool. What you can do is you can click and drag to the right to start playback, and you can also drag left to play in reverse. So this is useful if you're trying to pinpoint a specific part of the waveform, and you don't want to have to keep pressing Control spacebar over and over again. So if you just click and drag to the right, and you'll see if I stop there, the playback will just stop. And if I drag backwards, it'll actually play in reverse. So again, this is useful if you're trying to maybe pinpoint an individual note or drum hit or a chord or something like that within a recording. And the last tool is the pencil tool. And the pencil tool is actually very useful because what it does is it allows you to draw in your waveform and modify the waveform. And one of the things that we said when we were talking about, I think it was when we were talking about sample rate and bit depth, is that essentially your waveforms are just a digital reproduction of a voltage that fluctuates above and below a zero line here, a DC point, whatever you want to call it. What you can actually do with the pencil tool is you can modify a waveform to be drawn differently. And actually, what you just saw there was I tried to use the pencil tool, and when you try to use the pencil tool and you're not zoomed in far enough, it'll actually default to the zoom tool. And then once you're zoomed in far enough, then you can start drawing with the pencil tool. So you have to be zoomed in far enough for it to work. But basically, what you can do is you can draw in your own waveform here. And honestly, for that function, it's not very useful because it's probably not going to sound too good if I just, randomly draw in some shapes, then press play and see what I made. It's actually more useful when you're trying to fix a damaged recording. So let me get out of this view here. I'm actually going to just delete my drum track here. I no longer need it. And I'm going to pull up this vocal recording I have here. And it's just a singer, just a male singer. And what you'll see here, what you can probably see here in the waveform, is this big peak here. And that peak is a pop. And what happened was we had a bad input on our board that was causing the signal to crackle and pop. And so you'll be able to hear that there's a pop in the recording there. Now, normally you just have to go back and re-record it. But with the file editor and the pencil tool, you can actually redraw that part of the waveform to correct it and get rid of that pop. So let's just, let me just press play here so you can hear this.
Feeling faith lost in music.
So you can hear that pop in the recording. It's very noticeable. So what we're going to do is we are going to open this up in the file editor. Find that pop in the recording. There it is. And let's just listen to it one more time. Just drag over it and hit Control Spacebar. Yeah, you definitely can hear that. So we don't want that in the recording, but maybe we don't have the means to go back and, hire this guy back, bring him back into the studio, pay him more to sing this again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in here. And you'll see that essentially his voice is just a fluctuating, repeating voltage. What you can do with the pencil tool is you can try to just round off that pop in the recording. And so let's see if we can tell that we edited that. And now this is not a perfect process. We'll probably still be able to hear a little bit of a noise in there, not quite as hard of a pop as we had before. But you'll probably still be able to hear a little bit.
Dan Muse.
Yeah, let's try that one more time.
Dan Muse.
I don't know if you can hear that, but it's very subtle. So this is something that's, this is doable. I could hide this in a mix pretty easily, and we don't have to completely trash this recording. Now, there's actually another way that we can do this. So I'm going to just undo that a couple times. Let's zoom in on that little point there, a little pop there. And one thing that we can do with the pointer tool is you can actually just drag over that pop and then hit delete. And what it'll do is it'll shuffle the two sides of the recording together. Now you might be saying, well, this is going to, maybe this is going to shorten our recording. It's going to offset the rhythm, might offset phase issues. The thing is that in the grand scheme of things, if you look up here on the ruler, we are working at a sample level now. The ruler is, showing between these two different notches here, 473,000 and 474,000 samples. Now, this recording was recorded at 96K, which means that there's 96,000 samples per second. So in the grand scheme of things, like I was saying, if we delete 500 or 600 samples, 500 or 600 sample deletion is not really going to be noticed. However, if you're working with audio that needs to be phase locked like live drums, you'll want to use the pencil tool instead, because if you delete a section from one track, it's going to cause that track to go out of phase from the rest of the track. One more thing you want to double check here before you hit delete is right click and make sure that this snap edits to zero crossings is on. What this will do is it'll guarantee that when you drag over this little waveform here, it'll automatically snap the beginning and end point to the nearest, most logical zero crossing. And what that does is it keeps us from having pops and clicks in the recording. So that's one more thing that you want to make sure that you do. So I'm just going to hit delete, press delete again. It's essentially shifted the two waveforms together and deleted what, gotten rid of what I just deleted there. And so let's see what this sounds like. This is probably going to be very clear. You're not even going to be able to hear that there was an edit there. Just drag over it, press Control Spacebar.
Dan Muse. Dan Muse.
Yeah, you can't even tell that there was ever a pop there. So the pencil tool, and then also being able to zoom into the sample level and delete tiny little slices out of the recording, can really help to reconstruct a recording that otherwise you'd have to just trash. All right, now that we're done with the edit tools, let's take a look at some of the edit functions. All of the edit functions here are under the Functions tab up here. You got functions like normalize, change gain, fades, silence, invert, reverse trim, which we talked about earlier, and remove DC offset. We're going to go over all of these. So the very first one there, normalize. What normalize does is you make a selection, or you can hit Command A2 to do it all. But whatever you select, it will analyze that material, find what the peak value in that recording is, and then bump that peak value up to its maximum volume. So I've selected this. I'm going to go up to Functions, Normalize, or Control N. And what it does is it finds the peak point, the peak volume in that waveform, and then pushes it up to basically 0.0 dB. So it can't go any further without clipping. And so it's a way to get the most out of your recording volume-wise. So that's what normalize does. If you want to change gain, but you don't want it to be max volume, you can actually use the change gain function, or you can press Control G. And what change gain lets you do is it allows you to manually adjust the gain. Oh, my window showed up on my other screen over here. Here we go. But it allows you to search for the maximum gain in that selection, and it tells you what it is. So right now, this is currently at max volume at negative 4.04 decibels. You can change that maximum volume in a percentage or in decibels. And so let's say I want to increase this by 7%, which is going to result in a 0.6 decibel increase. And you can see the results of your gain change at the bottom here. And we've boosted that recording just a little bit. So this is a great way, if you've got a recording where maybe one phrase was recorded too quiet and you don't want to have to go in with automation and bump it up, you can actually just select that area that you want to bump up, do the change gain function, bump it up or bump it down to meet the volume of everything else. Okay, the next tool I'm going to show you are destructive fades. Now, these two fade in and fade out options are destructive fades. They're not like the fades that we add in the arrange area. Basically, it's pretty simple. Basically, what you do is you select what you want to fade in or fade out. You go up to Functions, Fade Out, and it fades it. Or you can do a fade in as well. Functions, Fade In. And it's a destructive fade, so it's actually changing the source file. If you want to change the shape of your fades, what you do is you go to Functions, Settings, and from here what you can do is you can alter what type of fade in or what type of fade out you want. And so you can adjust the curve. Maybe I want my fade in to be more of like an exponential curve. And then the next fade that I create, that's a fade in, functions fade in, will be more of an exponential fade. So that's just how you can create destructive fades in the file editor. All right, the next function is reverse. Reverse is really cool because what you can do is you can reverse the playback of your audio. Now, I guess I shouldn't have deleted that that drum track I had. Let me get that back there. Here we go. And what I'm going to do with my drum track here is I'm just going to isolate that very last crash cymbal at the very end there. And so this is what it sounds like. It's just a kick and a crash cymbal. And after I drag over it, I'm going to go to Functions Trim. It's going to trim out everything except for that selection. And what we can do now is we can apply the reverse function to it. And it's actually going to play back in reverse now. So now we're going to have this cool kind of sweeping in swell effect. So if you want to use that musically as like a special effect or like a build-up or something, well, you can. The problem is going to be that when you try to... let me get back in there. Yeah, the problem is going to be that when you try to use this up here, and for some reason my file disappeared. There we go. I just had to go find my... in my project folder here, I had to go find my my drums region. For some reason, it disappeared from up here. But anyway, what I was saying is that the problem now is that what if what if we shorten this a little bit, and then what if we want let's shorten it with ticks actually. What if we want the end of this region to match up, say, with a bar line or a beat line instead of the beginning of the region? One of the things we talked about in a previous episode was that, if I use bar mode, set it to absolute, and then maybe set my drag mode to, or actually the drag mode doesn't matter, but basically that the front end of the file, the front end of the region is going to match up with the grid line. So what if I want the tail end of this to match up with the grid line? What you have to do to make this work is in your file editor, you have to change your anchor point. And what the anchor point is the anchor point is where the region is going to snap to the grid. So if I drag this anchor all the way over here, toward the end of the region here, not right at the end of the region, but toward the end of the region. Let's try that again. There we go. So now the anchor is there. If we go back to the arrange window, and I'll zoom in a little bit, you'll see that the anchor is denoted by a little dot there. And basically what that means is that little dot is going to snap to grid lines now. So if I set my snap mode to beat mode, that dot will snap to the beats rather than the beginning of the region. So if I want this kind of swell up to snap to the grid now, you can see that the dot there, the anchor point, now snaps to the grid line. So that's just the anchor. That's another thing that you can go and adjust in the file editor. All right, let's go back to the vocals here. Okay. The next function I want to show you is silence. And all silence does is it inserts silence wherever you select. So maybe if there's like a point where we want to cut something out here, you drag over it with the pointer tool, go to Functions, Silence, and instead of deleting and shuffling it, it just inserts silence at that point. So if you want to keep the position of these two waveforms where they were before without being shifted and shuffled together, instead of deleting, you just use silence. All right. The next function I want to show you is remove DC offset. We actually already talked about trim before. I already showed that, so I'm not going to go over it. And invert, I'm going to come back to in the next video because it's going to take far too long for me to go over inverting inverting techniques and things we can do with that in this video. I'm already up to like 25 minutes already, so I'll actually make a separate video for the invert function. So what remove DC offset does is it it removes DC offset, but occasionally you'll end up with a recording. I'm going to just delete these. Let's delete this vocal recording here. Occasionally you'll end up with a recording that has a waveform that kind of looks like this, and you're like, what's going on here? And if you open it up in the sample editor, you'll actually see that the waveform is not oscillating, not fluctuating above and below the 0 line or the DC line. And this is what's called DC offset. And it's usually caused by some voltage inconsistency in your mic preamps or your converters, or maybe the preamps or converters are not getting enough power or too much power. And the problem with DC offset is it doesn't allow the waveform to be as loud as it possibly could be because the waveform has been shifted upward or downward. So what you can do is you just hit Command A to select everything, go to Functions, remove DC offset. It'll analyze it and it'll tell you how much DC offset you have. I have 43.007% DC offset, which is a lot. I mean, it'll never be that much in a practical situation. I had to artificially make this have DC offset. But what it'll do is it'll tell you how much you have, and then you say remove, and it'll center the waveform on the 0 line like it should be. So now that we've corrected the DC offset, we have equal headroom above and below the 0 line to amplify, compress, add gain to the signal. So we have more room to make the signal louder if we need to. All right, so that's the file editor in a nutshell. In the next episode, like I promised, I'll show you how to work with the invert function, and I'll show you how you can use phase cancellation techniques to isolate vocals from a song and also remove vocals from a song.